Shalom. First and foremost, Kahala Yamala, Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Harachakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the bishops, and the elders of Great Millstone, from whom I learned the truth from. And also peace and salutations to the hopeful elect of the nation of Israel, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. And in this video, I'm going to be going into an article from the Newsbreak app. And as you can see, the title of the article, it says, Trump takes control of Metro Police, deploys National Guard to take on Washington crime. Okay, and that's Washington, D.C. All right, and the source of this article, as you see, is from Fox News. All right, in which, I'm more than sure a lot of you brothers and sisters have, came across this bit of news as of lately, over these past couple of days or whatnot. All right. Well, pretty much the other day, you had an incident out there in Washington, D.C., where a former Doge worker, I believe it gives his name in this article. Let me see. Yeah, right here. Trump threatens to federalize D.C. after ex-Doge employee, all right, nicknamed Big Balls, all right, which Esau in his folly. All right, but it says violently beaten. Okay, and so it goes into it, but pretty much since this particular incident took place, which the news is saying that that it was two teenagers who allegedly carried out this attack on this former Doge worker. All right, which I believe it gives his name. Let's see. I believe it gives his name somewhere. Well, it doesn't quite give his name in the article, but you could pretty much look up that particular incident on your own. All right, but pretty much as you've been hearing on the news lately, ever since that particular incident took place, where that ex-Doge worker was attacked out there in D.C. over about a couple of days ago. All right, which the news is saying that it was two teenagers who carried out the attack. Well, basically, this ex-Doge worker, he witnessed those alleged two teenagers, mugging some woman, or carjacking some woman, or something, something of that case. And basically, the ex-Doge worker, nicknamed Big Balls, stepped in and intervened to try to fight off the alleged attackers, and ended up getting attacked himself. Okay, beaten to to the point to where he became bloodied. In which to this day, the news still hasn't released the pictures of the alleged attackers and whatnot, which, it all could be staged, it all could be real. You never know when it comes to Esau eating what's really going on. All right, but as we can see, that particular incident was enough, okay, for this guy Trump, all right, DJ Donald Trump, all right, who we believe is Nero in reincarnation, to basically speak as a dragon, okay, to justify coming down with the sword in the form of, taking control over Washington, D.C.'s Metro Police, and as well sending the National Guard throughout Washington, D.C. to, all in the name of fighting crime out there in D.C., okay, bringing forth peace and safety to the streets of D.C. And as it goes into, it says, President Donald Trump announced Monday that he is activating National Guard troops and is taking over the Metropolitan Police Department to tackle crime in Washington, after beefing up federal law enforcement presence in the nation's capital Saturday. See that? So he's basically sending out the National Guard throughout D.C. and taking control over the Metro Police out there in D.C., and as well ramping up law enforcement throughout DC, all in the name of tackling crime, fighting crime. Okay, all in the name of establishing order out of chaos that's happening out there in DC. Basically federalizing the police. Okay, and this is all again a form of order out of chaos, order ab chaos. All right, as we know, the elites of Esau Edom, okay, they have an agenda to establish their left hand order, ultimately their NWO system via the Charagma. All right, but they know that in order to be justified in establishing that NWO system, because what's gonna be one of the main sales pitches that the elites are going to use to justify or convince the masses of the people to pretty much give into the NWO, that the NWO system is going to be peace and safety. Okay, peace and safety out of all the chaos that these elites of Esau Edom need to orchestrate in order to justify coming with the NWO. All right, and of course, we know a part of the chaos that they want to orchestrate to come down with the NWO is an uptick in crime, and in which we've greatly been seeing that over these past 4 years. Since Biden got elected up until now, we've drastically seen an uptick in crime throughout the United States over these past 4 years. Okay, homicides, burglaries, murder. Okay, and even in certain states, all right, in particular, democratic states, you've had even situations where even shoplifting was legal in a lot of cases, as long as the shoplifters didn't steal over a certain amount of worth of merchandise. Okay, basically people could just walk into the store, grab a bunch of merchandise casually, take their time, not have to worry about somebody calling the police, and just casually walk out of there with the merchandise that they took, as long as the merchandise wasn't over a certain amount of worth of money. Basically, they were allowed to do that. Okay, and has led to an increase in shoplifting and things like that. All right, and as well, we've been seeing just an uptick in crime overall throughout the country over the past 4 years. Since Biden and the Democrats took over, and then now here you got this guy Trump. Okay, now that the elites have pretty much used the left and the Democrats to do their part, bringing forth the chaos. Now here the elites set up this guy Trump and the Republicans, to set up the order that they need, okay, to combat the chaos that they've orchestrated, okay. And this right here is just one example of the elites using Trump and the Republicans and whatnot to establish order out of chaos. Trump federalizing the DC police and sending the National Guard down, all under the guise of fighting crime out there in DC. Okay, getting a grip on crime. It says quote, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C. See that? Law, order, and public safety. Order out of chaos. Peace and safety. It says Trump told reporters at a Monday press conference. And then it says, quote, and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And, you could just use your imagination as to, pretty much what he meant by that. All right, as it said again, as it's quoting from Trump, and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. Meaning what? Okay, basically, these National Guard troops and these federalized police are pretty much going to be trained to, they see something suspect, then they'll pretty much have the green light to just put somebody down, okay, at will, under the guise of again, peace and safety and self-defense and all this stuff. All right, they'll basically be allowed to come down with a sword and put shit down. All right, and this is all okay. This is all dragon talk, as it speaks of in Revelation 13, verse 11. Okay, it says, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth." All right, talking about America. And it says, "And he had two horns like a lamb," the two horns being the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. All right, because when you think of a horn, according to the Bible, a horn is symbolic of power. You know, and these two political party structures here in America, they have a stronghold over the minds of the average American person. That's why you go on the internet, and pretty much any internet platform that you can come across, you always see people in the comment section, going back and forth, arguing against one another over Trump and Biden and Obama, Kamala Harris, the Republican versus Democrat, Democrat versus Republican, this whole right wing, left wing nonsense that people are hooked to, okay, which is all one big psyop over these people. One big psychological operation that is being pulled over the American people, okay, to get people divided up over this politics, when neither one of these political parties give a damn about the average American, especially the so-called middle class, okay. But they have these people thinking that one is better than the other, and one is more evil than the other, when they're both equally evil at the end of the day. Okay, it's just two wings of the same bird going to the same destinations, which is what the NWO system, and sticking a karagma inside of all these people. Okay, but it says Revelation 13:11 again, "And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth," which again is talking about America. "And he had two horns like a lamb," the Democrat and Republican Party. And when you think of a lamb in the scripture, Yahweh Shah is likened to a lamb. A lamb is symbolic of a Messiah or a Savior. And that's how Esau presents this whole Democrat Republican system. Okay, they have these Democrats or these Republicans, these presidents and these politicians get on TV, with suits and ties, clean shaven, clean cut, all right, standing in front of people, making all these broken promises and making all these feigned speeches with fair words, saying they're gonna do this, that, and the third. Okay, they're gonna be for the middle class, and make America great again, and bring back jobs, and this, that, and the third. Make the economy strong again. All right, and these politicians, and these presidents, they all end up doing the same thing, breaking all these promises, and so-called letting down these so-called American people. Okay, but they're presented like a lamb. Okay, presented as some type of saviors or messiahs before the people. But it's all leading to what? As it said, "And he spake as a dragon." And you see, and all this Democrat Republican psyop that we've been seeing over these past 4 years, 8 years, so on and so forth, it's all just been one big psyop. Okay, to get people's minds wrapped up in this whole Democrat Republican nonsense, making you think that one party is better than the other, one party is more evil than another. But it's all leading to Esau, Edom, all right, and both of these parties combined speaking as a dragon, okay, in which the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone, as anytime this scripture is always brought out, and he spake as a dragon, it ultimately speaks to, all right, draconian laws, all right, which let's look that up. Okay, so this is let's pull this up. This is from vocabulary.com. Okay, and this is the word draconian, and it means to describe laws or rules that are really harsh and repressive. Okay, and then it goes into in ancient Athens. Okay, what is Athens? The capital of Greece. You see, in this whole American system, this whole beast system, America, NATO, and the EU, not only does it, not only is it, modeled after ancient Rome, but it's also modeled after ancient Greece. Because what did ancient Rome and ancient Greece have in common back in the ancient world? They were both ran by Edomites, Esau, Edom. Okay, and so this whole entire system, as one of the nicknames of the ancient Western Roman Empire is known as what? The ancient Greco-Roman Empire. Because what? Certain customs that were practiced in ancient Rome went back to ancient Greece. Okay, and again, ultimately, the same biblical nation of people that ruled ancient Greece, the Edomites, also ruled ancient Rome, the Edomites. Okay, and so, as Esau, Edom is empowering the earth all over again to fulfill his blessing, ruling over the fatness of the earth via the sword, through violence, through, warfare. Okay, via the power structure of America, NATO, and the EU. This is basically the Greco-Roman Empire back all over again. And so, as I said again, in ancient Athens, Greece, Draco, okay, which is what the word draconian is named after, an ancient Athenian lawgiver, Draco, it says, was a guy who made some seriously strict laws. So rules that are too restrictive or just plain unfair are called draconian. It says sentencing someone to 10 years in prison for littering would be draconian. Some people think Singapore's chewing gum ban is draconian. And then it says this is a strong word. So if your parents make, all right, yada, 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 so on and so forth. But pretty much the main point as it went into, draconian, which goes back to an Athenian lawgiver, Draco, basically means it describes laws or rules that are harsh, okay, unfair, restrictive, okay. And so, as it reads again in Revelation 13, verse 11, it says, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, Republican and Democrat Party, and he spake as a dragon, and that's what is leading up to, these Democrats and these Republicans being put in front of your face on the TV, making it seem as if they're all divided against one another, and they're trying to prove that one is better than the other. But really, behind closed doors, they all agree on many things, especially when it comes to bringing more hell upon you so-called American people. Okay, and especially, all right, when it's going to come down to, okay, more police force, more National Guard troops deployed throughout cities across America, all under the guise of, fighting crime and tackling crime and restoring peace and safety to the streets of Babylon and Great America. Okay, restoring order out of chaos. You see, it's all leading to draconian laws, draconian measures. All right, and you best believe, with this guy Trump, federalizing the police out there in D.C., okay, sending National Guard troops out there in D.C. to help fight against crime. You best believe this, stuff like this, okay, is all going to lead to, draconian measures, draconian laws, and of course, as we've, been keeping up throughout this year, this is not the first time that Trump has deployed National Guard troops in particular major cities in the United States to help, bring forth order out of chaos. Remember a few months ago when they had those anti-ICE protests and riots out there in Los Angeles, and how did Trump respond to that? Okay, by pretty much stepping over the government out there in California, ran by Gavin Newsom, you see, and deploying National Guard troops and Marines out there in Los Angeles where those protests were mainly taking place at. Okay, and so you best believe, as crime is ramping up more and more throughout different cities throughout the United States. Okay, you best believe Trump is going to be deploying more National Guard troops throughout the United States, throughout different cities, and as well federalizing different police force throughout different cities across the United States. Okay, to bring forth draconian measures, draconian laws. Okay, to basically become the dictator that he was pretty much put in office to be. All right, to do the bidding of the elite, to bring forth order out of chaos. You see, and also not to mention, as we've been hearing in the news as well, Trump has also been talking about, using the police and the National Guard to get rid of the homeless out there in D.C. as well, which, again, is even more draconian laws, draconian measures, which, all right, let's go to Isaiah 10. Isaiah 10 verse 1, it says, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, draconian measures, and it says, and that right grievousness which they have prescribed. Okay, prescribed meaning what? Pre meaning before, and then scribe right. You see that? Because a lot of these things that Esau does and pushes, okay, he has it written in law before he actually acts upon it. That's why, all throughout this year, we've been, damn near every day of this year, we've been seeing Trump do what? Signing off on executive orders. Okay. Signing off on executive orders to, tackle the migrant situation across the country. Okay. Via the force of ICE. All right. Which Trump has, has told that he was going to ramp up more ICE agents throughout the cities across the United States. Okay, so basically bringing that into the picture, an increase of ICE agents across America, and as well an increase of National Guard troops being deployed throughout the United States, federalizing the police throughout cities across the United States. What you think all this is leading up to? Okay, martial law. All right, Trump basically setting himself up as a dictator, which is ultimately all, being orchestrated by the elites at the end of the day. This guy Trump is just a puppet, okay? And then not to mention that, the U.S. government also uses Palantir, okay? Which Palantir, when you go into it, is basically an AI system that the military uses to predict where certain attacks are going to happen at, okay? Who's going to attack, things like that, okay? Well, the fact that Palantir has been recently brought into the military, okay, what you think that's all going to be used for? All right, not to wage war on not just foreign nations, but also used to wage war on American people, okay? And then with all these executive orders that Trump is signing, okay, all these things, Esau's gonna come down with it, because as it went into, again, all these things are prescribed. Before Esau Edom comes down with some type of force, or comes down with the sword, he's gonna have it written in law. Okay, so that when he does it, he'll justify by saying, look, this is written down in my law. Okay, it's prescribed, and therefore I'm justified in doing it. All right, but at the end of the day, as I said, it's all unrighteous decrees, draconian measures. It says again, Isaiah 10 verse 1, woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that right grievousness which they have prescribed. Verse 2, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. And let's read that in the NLT. Isaiah 10 verse 1 in the NLT. What sorrow awaits the unjust judges and those who issue unfair laws. They deprive the poor of justice and deny the rights of the needy among my people. That they prey on widows and take advantage of orphans. They deprive the poor of justice and deny the rights of the needy among the people. You see, and as of lately, Trump has been talking about using the police and using the National Guard out there in D.C. to pretty much get rid of the homeless out there in D.C. basically arresting people, homeless people. Which, how in the hell do you arrest a homeless person? Okay, you arrest somebody that's homeless just for simply being homeless. You know, something that, they're in a situation where they have no choice but to be in. Okay, and then not to mention, you also got to consider as well that you may even have a lot of homeless veterans that's out there in DC that's at risk of being arrested, due to Trump's draconian measures, getting rid of the homeless out of the streets. And so, but all in all, it's just all turning into one big ball of mess. Okay, and it's all unconstitutional. Okay, this is going to ruffle the feathers of a lot of these patriotic, red-blooded, MAGA hat-wearing Edomites. Okay, because a lot of this is really unconstitutional when you go into it. Okay, but hey, that's what this whole administration was set up to do. Okay, do away with people's constitutional rights. Chip away at people's constitutional rights little by little. Okay, all under the guise of peace and safety and peace and safety and order. You see, but let's see. So let's go back to it real quick. And as well, another thing to note as well. You notice over these past few days or so, we've also been seeing an uptick in mass shootings and things like that taking place throughout the country over these past few days. Like you had the mass shooting up there in Manhattan a few days ago, where supposedly you had a guy just casually walking around Manhattan, New York, okay, with a long rifle in his hand, okay, who supposedly went to the NFL headquarters out there in Manhattan, who went up to the 33rd floor, that number 33, okay, and supposedly just shot up a whole bunch of people, all right, at the NFL headquarters, all because he had, CTE or had some type of, a major head trauma from playing football in his younger days, or whatever the case, and then not to mention when you go into that story, when you look at the pictures of the alleged suspect of that Manhattan shooting, he looked like, he looked like a Jake. When you go into that story, and then not to mention you had recently you had that shooting up there in Montana, where it was guy who I forget his name, but he basically looked like an Edomite when they showed his picture. He had the mustache and everything, and he supposedly shot up 4 people up there in Montana. Okay, and then as well as lately, you had a shooting at a military fort down there in Georgia. Okay, where supposedly a military officer, I believe, shot up a number of people out there in the military fort out there in Georgia. And even when you look at the picture of the suspect of that shooting, it looked like a Jake. So, and then not to mention the alleged attackers of this former Doge worker, okay, nicknamed Big Balls. All right, you best believe, Esau's gonna look to blame Jake for this as well, because again, Trump is deploying National Guard troops and federalizing the police out there in D.C. under the guise of tackling crime out there in D.C. and fighting crime. And when you look at how Esau operates, who does Esau always push at? Always pushes as the face of crime throughout the United States. Jake, okay, Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, the so-called Negro tribes, and as well over these past few years, as we've been seeing floods of migrants, especially amongst the northern tribes coming into here in America. What does Esau portray these migrants that's of the northern tribes as well? Criminals, cartel members, okay? So Esau, he's stirring up this narrative, which, he's been doing for years, but especially now more than ever, where he's stirring up this narrative, making Jake the face of crime and the face of mass shootings and terror attacks and things like that. And so now, as we see Trump, this is how Trump is responding to some of the recent attacks, and crime and shootings that's been taking place recently, especially out there in D.C. Sending the National Guard and federalizing police. So what do you think this all is coming down to? Esau's getting ready to come down in great wrath. He's getting ready to come down with the sword, and especially come down upon the tribes, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. Okay, he's getting ready to make Jake the face of crime and terror. He's getting ready to make Jake the face of what's wrong in the country. You see that? All to justify coming down with the sword, all to justify fighting crime and fighting, bringing order out of chaos, basically. Okay? And, and this is all a part of prophecy. Okay? Well, so let's get out of the NLT. Let's go back to the KJV. Let's go to Revelation 12. Revelation 12 verse 12, it says, "Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he know that he hath but a short time." So Esau is getting ready to come down with great wrath. And he's definitely going to use this whole Trump administration to come down with the sword, come down with great wrath. Issue forth martial law, issue forth order out of chaos. You see, to ultimately, chip away at people's constitutional rights, all to establish that NWO agenda that Esau is seeking to establish via the Charagma. And a major part of how Esau is going to go forward with that agenda is orchestrating major chaos throughout society and throughout the country, to justify coming down with the sword. Okay, all under the guise of bringing forth order out of all this chaos that Esau is orchestrating. All right, but it's all because, as I said, because he knows he has but a short time left. Esau has to hurry up and try to establish this plan, this agenda, this NWO agenda, to establish Satan's kingdom on the earth, and put the Charagma in all humanity, and wage war against the tribes. Because Esau is trying to get the birthright back, but he knows he's on limited time. He knows he's at the last days of his blessings, that he's in the last days of his rulership, and so he's coming down with warp speed, okay, and not looking back, to go forward with the NWO, okay, and come down with the sword and take out as many people as he can, okay, to go forward with that agenda. You see. And guess what? 2/3 of our people that's not, seeking the Lord while he may be found, while this word is still going out, okay? They're still trusting the shadow of Esau, Edom, this modern day Egypt. Hey, 2/3 of our people, when Esau comes down with a sword and martial law and great wrath, hey, 2/3 of our people, they're going to fall victim, all right? Because, as we just read, not only is Esau coming down with great wrath, but ultimately Esau's great wrath is going to be part of the judgment of Yahweh Shema Shai, as our forefather King David said in Psalms 17, and matter of fact, I'll start at verse 11. It says, this is a psalm by King David. He says, "They have now compassed us in our steps. They have set their eyes bowing down to the earth." It's King David talking about the wicked, which we know is ultimately speaking of Esau, Edom. They have now compassed us in our steps. All right. And, the way that Trump is moving with deploying martial law to different cities, and as well as ICE agents throughout different cities. Hey, this is all speaking to this scripture right here. And it says, they have set their eyes bowing down to the earth. And when you read the same verse in the NLT, Psalm 17 verse 11 in the NLT, it says, "They track me down and surround me. watching for the chance to throw me to the ground. You see that? And hey, and Esau's wrapping up when in mass surveillance, using AI, okay, and Palantir for the purpose of mass surveillance throughout the country, which Trump is heavy into that as well. Increasing mass surveillance throughout the country, all for the purpose of what? Okay, coming down upon the poor, and ultimately coming down upon Jake. Okay, and it says again, Psalm 17 verse 11, the NLT, they track me down and surround me, watching for the chance to throw me to the ground. Yep, and that's what's going to be happening as Trump is going to be issuing forth, more National Guard troops and federalizing police throughout different cities across America. Okay, in the upcoming future, okay, to tackle more crime across America, to bring forth more order out of chaos. He's going to be seeking to, come down upon Jake, especially, tracking down Jake, using mass surveillance, using AI, okay, bring issuing martial law to, all right, to throw Jake down to the ground, okay, to put Jake down, unaliving Jake, or just straight up carrying Jake into these different prison camps, all right, in mass numbers. Your Alligator, Alcatraz, and all these other prison camps that Esau is building up across America. It says, verse 12, Psalm 17, verse 12, back in the KJV, like as a lion that is greedy of his prey, and as it were a young lion lurking in secret places. See that? Hey, and our forefather Peter, okay, who is King David in the spirit, all right. I believe 1 Peter 5 and 8, King David said what? The devil, go to and fro like a lion, seeking whom he may devour, roughly paraphrasing it. Well, hey, that's how Esau Edom is operating in these outer days, like a lion, lurking, okay, lurking for his prey, watching for his prey, which is who? Jake, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, okay, waiting for the right opportunity to pounce, okay, via martial law, National Guard, AI, you see, coming down with the sword, coming down with great wrath. And then it says in verse 13, arise, O Lord Yahweh, disappoint him, cast him down, okay, because the Lord is going to disappoint the devices of the wicked, right? Especially when Esau is going to be using his devices and doing all these things to come after the elect. That's when the Lord is going to step in and create divine intervention for the elect. You see that? And protect his elect from Esau's great wrath. It says again, arise, O Lord Yahweh, disappoint him, cast him down, deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy sword. See that? So the wicked, which is Esau Edom, is the sword of the Lord. You see that? And 2/3 of our people, as things are going to get more and more tight under this Trump administration, 2/3 of our people that's not seeking the Lord while he may be found, and repenting and converting and trying to work out their salvation, when Esau is going to come down with great wrath with his sword, which is going to be ordained by Yahweh Shema Shai, 2/3 of our people are going to fall victim to Esau's great wrath, which is ultimately the judgment of Yahweh Shema Shai. Okay? This is Isaiah 65 verse 11. It says, but ye are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh. Okay? Jake pulling the shoulder against his truth, not taking heed to the prophets and the men of the Lord preaching his gospel. It says, but ye are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop. Okay, and who is that troop? Esau Edom. It says, and that furnish the drink offering unto that number. Therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter, because when I called, ye did not answer. And how is the Lord calling our people? Through the mouth of the prophets. Okay, starting with the apostles and the bishops and the elders of Great Millstone. All right, as well as the beloved men who labor before them. Going back to our Bivens. It says, because when I called, ye did not answer. When I spake, ye did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes. Jake scoffing, mocking, gainsaying, naysaying, Okay, just saying all manner of evil against the men of the Lord and against His Israelite awakening as a whole. You know, walking after their own lusts. Jake is just continuing to do evil before Yahweh Shema Shah. So therefore, what the Lord's gonna number 2/3 of our people to the sword and bow them down to the slaughter, as it read. It says, and did choose that wherein I delighted not. 2/3 of our people, they're gonna choose death all over again, choosing the ways of Esau, Edom, choosing the ways of the oppressor, and ultimately choose that charagma, okay, and be destroyed by Yahweh Shema Shah. And let's read this in the NLT. Isaiah 65 verses 11 and 12 in the NLT. It says, but because the rest of you have forsaken the Lord Yahweh and have forgotten his temple, and because you have prepared feasts to honor the God of fate, and have offered mixed wine to the God of destiny, says verse 12, now will I destine you for the sword. See that? All of you will bow down before the executioner. And what is the executioner that it's talking about? Esau, Edom, the sword of the Lord, as we read in Psalm 17 verse 13. It says again, all of you will bow down before the executioner. For when I called, you did not answer. When I spoke, you did not listen. You deliberately, which means intentionally or purposely, you deliberately sinned. See that? Jake deliberately mocking, scoffing, okay, intentionally, talking shit against the Hebrew Israelite awakening, okay, gainsaying, it says you deliberately sinned before my very eyes and chose to do what I despise. See that? And so, because 2/3 of our people, continue to rebel and, reject the word of Yahweh Shema Shai and refuse to repent, hey, the Lord's gonna make them bow down before the executioner, Esau, Edom, number them to the sword. You see that? And so, hey, what we're looking at right here, this is just the beginning stages. Trump deploying the National Guard troops out there in D.C. to fight against crime, which is all code word to come against Jake. And it's only going to get worse from this point going forward. You see that? So so I'm gonna leave it right there. Lord willing, this video is edifying, and until next time, shalom.